We will call the meeting to order. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, March 20th, 2014. The time is 7 o'clock. We're in the Riverside Township Hall. I'd ask our clerk to please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Sussman.
Here.
Trustee Pollak.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Collins.
Here.
Trustee Foley.
Here.
Village Manager Scalera.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Kathy Haley.
We have a quorum. If you please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody who have shown up tonight to watch the meeting, and those at home. If you're here and you'd like to address the board at any time during the meeting, you're welcome to do so, either during the public comment section, or if you would rather wait until a particular agenda item comes up, you're welcome to wait and do it then. I just ask that you be recognized by the president and make your comments from the podium so that the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. So first up this evening are presentations and public comment, and we have a year-end wedge report by our police chief Thomas Weitzel. Chief Weitzel.
President and trustees, I just wanted to update you on the Wedge annual report because I serve as chairman and it was going to be released. It was released to the municipalities for them to share with their boards and to post on their websites if they so choose, the municipalities that are involved. And this week it was released to the local medias. The 2013 Wedge report, we have 10 communities now in Wedge. We lost one community this year, that was Cicero. That's because they had severe personnel cuts, and the chief could no longer support putting people into that task force. So we're down to 10 communities. They either surround each other or we touch each other. About the farthest north community would be River Grove, and Riverside here in Brookfield would probably be the farthest south communities that are involved in that. We worked less time this year. We worked 2 days every 2 weeks, so it's 4 days a month. We used to work 3 days every 2 weeks, but because of pressure since about 2009, many police departments had not started to replace the officers they lost, so the chiefs were having a difficult time staffing it with that many days, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't expend a great deal of overtime. So we were able to accomplish the same mission with 4 days a month unless there was an event going on that was pre-planned. Some of the communities have large summer fests that we work. Forest Park would be an example, Berwyn would be an example, but we provide manpower for those incidents or those events where at times they can have some gang activity or unwanted gang activity, really. So the ones we worked last year, the special events, were the Forest Park 4th of July events. We worked an event in Forest Park, and we also worked an event in River Grove. Outside of those events, the missions are planned weeks ahead of time. The officers go out with very specific missions. Currently, our street commanders for the unit is River Forest Detective Marty Grill, who has family here that lives in Riverside, and Detective Sergeant Mike Keating from Forest Park. They are the officers that run the day-to-day operations when we work Wedge. So we had several felony arrests. We had seizures of narcotics again. We removed weapons from the immediate west suburbs. And I think what's really significant really in the report is we tried to cut it down and not put a lot of detail of stats in there and more detailing the major arrests that we made and partnerships we have. And the two partnerships that we had in 2013 that we did not have in 2012 were DEA and ATF. Our federal agencies have become a partner with Wedge, and their resources are invaluable, and we've partnered with them several times. And in some cases, when we work with the federal government, they will reimburse the officers' time that they're spent on that unit if it is a federal investigation that the municipality is investigating. how that would work is the crime would have taken place in one of these 10 communities, which rises to, could be a federal offense, or we could use the federal resources, and then the DEA or ATF will partner with us to complete those investigations, make the arrests, and then, like I said, in some cases, reimburse the municipalities. So it's a very successful program, I believe. It's really going on my 5th year as being the chairman. Maybe that's by default because nobody else wants to do it. I don't know. But we really have really good officers. My officers that rotate are John Cairo, Jim Lazansky, and Fabian Navarro. They don't work at the same time because we try to avoid any expenditure of a great deal of overtime. In fact, most of my officers either are shifted, they agree to be shifted so that they could work it and not get overtime, or they take comp time. And we recently put Fabian Navarro in because we needed a Spanish-speaking officer, and he is fluent in Spanish, and he's helped the unit out tremendously. So I would thank the board. I don't know if the board remembers when they supported the unit. Really was under Chief Karczewski when he was here. It was started by Chief Bill Kushner, who at that time was the chief in Berwyn. He is now the chief in Des Plaines. And it was his idea, and Chief Karczewski was one of the first 4 communities Riverside was to come on along with Berwyn, and then now it's expanded up to 10. So I think when the board allowed the Village of Riverside and our police department to get involved in this task force, I think it was a very wise choice, and it served the village well. So I'd answer any questions the board may have, if you do, on our report or anything else.
Anything?
So,
Mr. Foley?
I see, Tom, that you guys go to Chicago. Do you work then in conjunction with the Chicago Police Department, or do you let them know that you're...
They do. We don't, if the investigation takes us there or the arrest takes us there, we have the superintendent's office has given us a liaison. He's actually the gang and task force lieutenant that works the 25th district, which would be bordered by like Harlem and North Avenue by that Sears building there. The gang commander from there is designated as the liaison for Wedge. So we let him know, and even if it's not in the 25th district, he's the gang tactical lieutenant, and he works directly with us.
Thank you.
I appreciate you putting individual profiles of the work that Wedge has done. I'm curious on a broader level about your feelings on how Wedge is actually having an effect on gay activity in our immediate area or in the Wedge-type communities.
I think it has a significant impact. They don't know borders. I know we say that a lot, but when we bring these individuals in and they're in custody, they maybe are arrested, maybe North Riverside, they usually don't know what community they're in. They don't care. They wouldn't know the difference between Riverside, North Riverside, and Forest Park, most of them. They don't know where the borders are. So we're actually sharing criminals. They're going from place to place. And one of the things I didn't put in the report is that we did a study to see where the last known addresses were before the individual, we arrested them, their current address or where they're living now. And pretty much, well, over 65% of them have prior City of Chicago addresses, or were living in the City of Chicago when we made an arrest. So they're moving out west to commit their crimes. And most of this gang crime is directly related to narcotics. They're trying to set up narcotics, very lucrative, and they're self-admitted gang members. They don't hide their affiliation. And there's money to be made out here. And quite frankly, I've said it before, a lot of this inner city Chicago gangs, they used to feel that the suburbs were not prepared to handle the sophistication of the gangs. Chicago has a big force, a big gang unit, has a lot of resources they can throw towards that crime, and most of these municipalities don't. That's why we formed up. So I don't think that's as much anymore, but they used to think that really we weren't sophisticated enough to handle their crimes, and they could just come to the suburbs, set up narcotics, street corner sales, and go undetected. And I think we've put a dent in that.
Anyone else? Thank you, Chief White. So this has been an extremely successful collaboration for a lot of years now, and you sell yourself short, I think. I think one of the reasons for its success, certainly in the last 5 years, has been your stewardship of it. So we appreciate you being there on behalf of all of our residents.
Thank you.
Next up, public comment. Would anyone like to address the board? Hearing none, we will move on to reports of village officers. I do have a few things I just wanted to fill the board and the residents in on. We've had a couple very nice events here in the last couple weeks with regard to economic development. On March 10th, our Economic Development Commission hosted a very nice event at the Choo Choo. Scott Zimmer at the Choo Choo was nice enough to open up his restaurant in the afternoon to let us all come in. And it was an opportunity for Tony Griffin, who is the head of the Berwyn Development Corporation in Berwyn, to come talk to an assembled group, both of the EDC, members of the Chamber of Commerce, and some of our local business owners, about how Berwyn has been moving forward with development in its area. And it was extremely nice. It was, I think it's the first of its kind that anybody around here can remember, where we actually had a group come together like this. Mayor Lavero from Berwyn was here with us, as was President Ketchmark and Trustee Ryan from Brookfield. So it was really nice to have our neighboring communities come in, and we all sat around and talked about common goals. So that was really very valuable. And then just a few days later, this past week, the Chamber of Commerce and the EDC had their first ever joint meeting, and we held it over at the Village Center. Pat Leone, the new owner of the Village Center, hosted that event, and it was another one of those opportunities for people to really get into some serious discussion about how we are going to work together and how we're going to blend the efforts of our Chamber of Commerce, which is primarily focused on business retention and supporting our local businesses, and then the village's efforts to reach out and to try to bring new businesses into town. So it's been a nice couple of weeks in terms of people really starting to get on the same page and move that forward. Today, Manager Scalera and I met with Commissioner Tobolsky and members of Brookfield and North Riverside and the Forest Preserve District with continuing discussions about the bicycle path from on First Avenue from RB all the way up to 26th. So I'm glad to say that is moving apace, and there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around it. And knock on wood, it seems like maybe this is, after decades of trying, this project might finally be within our grasp of accomplishment. Tied in with that, next week is the West Central Municipal Conference's annual trip to Springfield, and Commissioner Tobolsky and I are going to try to meet with Senator Sandoval and Secretary Schneider to talk more about First Avenue and the bike path. So hopefully we'll be able to get some further movement on that next week when I go down to Springfield. And lastly, I just want to remind everyone that at 11:57 a.m. today, spring started. We actually made it. Look at Ed Bailey back there. He's like, thank God. Winter. And to commemorate spring and all things wonderful, March 29th, Saturday, March 29th is Earth Hour. And it's sponsored every year by the World Wildlife Federation. And the idea is from 8:30 to 9:30 on Saturday night, turn your lights off. So that's all I have. Mr. Scalera?
I just have three things. The first is to inform the board that the village has submitted our ComEd grant request for the green program, and hopefully we will be one of the lucky recipients of that grant, which will allow us to offset some of the costs for the improvements that are going to be made at Patriots Park. Congratulations to Mike Collins, Ed Bailey, and the Public Works Department for, again, submitting and being awarded, the village actually, becoming a Tree City USA recognition. Ed and Mike work hard at maintaining that recognition, and I thank them for their work in regard to that. And then finally, just to alert everyone, you probably have seen signs on 31st Street, but the zoo is embarking on its capital project to the entrance along 31st and Gulfview, making improvements to the parking lot. which will create a traffic, a little bit of congestion along 31st Street, which is also going to take place at the same time that we are going to be doing our improvements at the intersection of First and Forest. Both projects have a end date of October, with them beginning, actually they started this week, and we anticipate our work beginning in May of this year. So it will be a little hectic along the First Avenue corridor there, and I just wanted to alert our residents and ask for their patience during that time. And that is all I have.
Thank you very much. Next up is approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone would like to discuss separately? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Collins, second by Ms. Sussman. Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Howard.
Aye.
Trustee Valiant.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next is reports of departments and commissions. I asked our Public Works Director, Ed Bailey, to come tonight to talk to us. We've all seen the disaster down in Swan Pond from the ice and all this winter. So I asked Mr. Bailey to come and just kind of give us an update on what has happened and what we need to do to address it. So, Mr. Bailey.
Good evening. Swan Pond clearly has taken a beating this winter. It's maybe unprecedented. I don't know if we've ever had this experience with the ice flows, flowing into the Swan Pond. We've had the floods before, certainly in my relatively short tenure, which just overflow the wall. But this year, I'll just run through kind of the litany of issues there. Starting on the upstream south end of Swan Pond, some of the top sections of the wall were displaced by the ice. Those are going to have to be reset, remortared. The leading edge of the new asphalt path is eroded. It was eroded back in January during the first ice dam. It was further eroded during the second. We pretty much temporary backfilled that. Soon, I'm continuing to think temperatures are going to get above freezing and stay there. We'll go in and remove that temporary material. We're planning to backfill with concrete, which I think obviously be a lot more permanent. There's sedimentation that will have to be further erosion, but we'll have to do some really landscape repair. The trees took a beating. Literally, I think the large ones, you can have seen the big pieces of bark that are broken or dislodged. Those larger trees will probably heal over. There's no guarantee, but certainly that's an injury to them. A lot of the smaller ones, they must have been really bent right over. You can see how on the edge facing the current, the ice flow, how they're scraped. It looks like they have a road rash on them, in fact. So we'll have to see how they recover. And obviously there's still ice in the south end, or the north end of Swan Pond, a lot of woody debris. Swan Pond tends to stay muddy. The soil tends to stay muddy for quite some time, so it's difficult to get in there and do much because you'll be ankle deep in mud. So we usually try to stay out of there until the ground firms up. The most significant damage is down in the north end, near where that culvert was installed. Severe erosion. I'm planning to repair that erosion in-house. I submitted a permit application to the Corps of Engineers last week. They acknowledged receipt of it this week, and in conversation with them, they said the approval process is 45 to 60 days, and probably closer to 60 than 45. So the soonest we could plan to undertake that project would be mid-May. If we were to contract it out, we think the cost would be about $8,000 to $9,000 just for that severe erosion near that culvert, on the downstream end. On April 26th, there's the Riverside Brookfield High School Day of Service. The Olmsted Society is also going to have a work day. This is kind of separate, but still related to Swan Pond. They're going to have a work day in Swan Pond, removing invasive species. So the Olmsted Society will have a dozen or so students helping them. If conditions permit, maybe that we'll be able to get them to do some woody debris retrieval, but it's probably still going to be too muddy to wade into it. Maybe some work, but basically that's a good thing, though, that they'll be doing invasive species removal. And there's still probably 20 ash trees in Swan Pond that need to be removed. We tried removing them this winter, kind of in the dead of winter when it was real cold. That was actually after the most recent ice dam event, but it was still very cold. But as it turns out, the soil underneath the ice and whatnot was still muddy, so it wasn't worth tearing up the Swan Pond. That means, though, that we'll probably wait quite some time before we go back and try to get those trees, and it's usually well into the summer before the ground firms up, certainly enough to support heavy equipment. So that's kind of the way it's looking to me. A lot of man hours are going to be required to put the Swan Pond back into shape. It's not necessarily complicated work or something like that, but a lot of man hours.
And we don't have a warranty with the Corps of Engineers, do we?
No, we tried that, and we found out if we had one, it expired. But I think that's it's just something that Swan Pond is, as I see it, a pretty significant feature for the village of Riverside, and it's subject to flood damage. We had the ice damming event and flooding of Swan Pond over the winter, but we haven't hit the flood season yet. Hopefully we don't have any floods, but that's always a risk, I guess, or probability even. But anyway, hopefully won't be accompanied by the big, massive pieces of ice. They're huge. Very, lots of force behind them, and you can see what they did to the trees and so on and so forth. So, soon as I think maybe middle of April, we should be able to get underway with some of our repairs as far as that erosion, get that wall put back together on the upstream end.
Any questions from you? I had a couple. The tree that you were talking about, that's the side of the old Fairbank Dam, is that the same area where you said it was eroded out from the walkway? Is that the same place that we had the eddy when the trees got hung up in the flood last year? Is that the same spot?
Generally, that's where the water, the water comes, it's coming down the river, obviously, but there's that high bank
Right.
upstream, and then it just comes right into the Swan
'Cause
Pond.
I'm trying to draw a difference in my mind between the extraordinary part of it with the ice flows and all, but it seems like that spot there and also the corner that you're talking about where the valve is, that this now is twice where we've had significant erosion problems at those two spots. If we foresee that that's going to continue, should we give some thought to possibly moving that path in away from the bank some more? Because this is twice now it's happened in the same locations.
Might depend upon how far in it's moved, but it's certainly vulnerable. I think that's part of the purpose of the path as you're walking along the river's edge and so on and so forth, and that's a trade-off, I suppose, because it's more vulnerable to water damage. I think you'd have to really, at the upstream end, really move it up against the hillside, and then work your way back towards the hill on the north end here. But you still have a current. The current, when the water enters Swan Pond on the upstream end, this comes right into Swan Pond where that wall is displaced right now. Those pieces are displaced, and it flows right through Swan Pond down to opposite end. So I don't know that the path would ever be, real safe.
We'll just have to monitor it and see.
Yeah, and, and this is kind of it's been reconditioned and reimagined or whatever, so, and we're just learning how events are going to affect it now.
I guess that's kind of where I was going with that, is are we starting to see kind of the new normal for?
Well, I think the ice damming was a very unusual event. More typical is the flooding in the spring. And that's, you can't predict or control that. A couple of years ago, there was pieces missing in the top of that wall, and but for those pieces missing, Swan Pond wouldn't have flooded. But, like I say, the pieces were missing from the top layer, of the wall. That's where the water came in, filled Swan Pond. And then we had the record crest last year too, last April. So I think we're going to just have to go along for a while and just kind of keep up with repairs and maybe anticipate it's going to be kind of a high maintenance area for a while.
Well, since we're now officially done with winter, I just want to reiterate what I've heard from a lot of residents about how happy everybody was with the work the Public Works did this winter. It was really hard on you guys.
Yeah.
And you stuck to it, and you kept our village looking great. We appreciate the work.
Yeah, that reflects on my employees. They have a tougher job than I do. I mean, they're driving snow plows and whatnot. But, I was very pleased frequently. I come in and checked on the snow removal operations. Always pleased with the status of the streets. Not perfect, but, given the nature of the snow event, I was very pleased. And it's not one of those that you want to experience every year, although maybe you get used to it then.
No, let's not get used to it.
Nothing like get used to.
Let's not do that. All right, thank you, Mr. Bailey. Appreciate it. Mr. Spadden?
May I make a comment?
Of course. Please.
Donald Spadney, 111 Woodside. I was going to say what a great job these guys did under very adverse circumstances, so you beat me to it. But it was a really hell of a job for them to do this year. And I think it's a very good idea about just plowing, salting the main roads and just plowing the side roads. That was done a few times. That was really nice as far as I could see. First of all, it's more beautiful, and second of all, it's easy to drive on there. People go slower on the side roads, and it seems like a great way to save some dough and not put so much salt in the river. Concerning the Swan Pond, now you got it. You guys did it, and now you got it. You're going to have more days of no use for that Swan Pond Park than you ever had before. If you look at it now, I didn't hear what was said because I thought you guys started at 7:30. But if you look at the piece that they had fenced, where they planted, where they did the depression, where the thing came in, the water came in the pipe. Trust me, it came in the pipe, it floated the whole thing like a boat, and it turned at 90 degrees. And if you go down there right now, you'll see the thing's pointing northwest. That fence, it's no longer aligned at all like it was. It floated a piece probably 30 feet wide and 50 feet long, like an ice boat. And it just, the water came in under there, it lifted the whole thing, and it turned at 90 degrees. And the fence is still intact. So you can see all that planting they did for the depression that they created, that's all over somewhere else now. But it's all intact, it's like one piece. The fence is still complete. So this is what's gonna happen. The pipe leaks, it's about a ½ inch wide, it's 18 inches high, that's about a 10-inch pipe, 24/7, 365. You have a direct connection between the river and there. If you look at it right now, the water level is exactly the same as it is in the river. And it's going to stay that way. Every time the river comes up, rainstorm, any event, it's going to flood into the park. The thing does not seal. I said that before, absent a lift device to throw the water over the top, you're always going to have this. Second thing, the little dam was built on a slant for a reason. Slough the water the other way. Doesn't do it anymore, it's not there. That water comes at tremendous velocity, it goes around the bridge at Berry Point, and it aims right for that wall. and you can see blocks that weigh 300 pounds of concrete way into the park. It froze into that stuff and it shoved them in there. You're going to have this many times, not all the time because it won't get that cold and that thick, but it's going to destroy that. It's already taken it down like 3 courses for maybe 20 feet. And it's much worse than it was before. The job they did of fixing that wall is just crap. It's just stupid, bad work. And Mr. Foley could probably go there and tell you, or you get Anderson, somebody go. It was just ridiculous. They just set it there and cracked a little mortar around on it. So if you look at the sections that the CCC built, you know, in the 30s, unskilled labor but good supervision, it all is intact and nearly perfect, except where the village left for decades, trees grow out of it. The stuff that was done there by these guys, zilch. It's all falling apart. And they didn't key that path in the second time they left it. It's just flat to the wall. You got to dig it down on the side toward the river about a foot, 18 inches, make a key down, then the water won't get under and push it through. Otherwise, this will happen all the time. It's just going to happen all the time. And unless that pipe is closed and something else is done down there, it's going to flood all the time. Remember, I keep telling you this? It's happening. It happens right now, right today. There's water going in as well as out. So, you know, you can't have a pipe water seeks its own level, right? It's not teeter-totter. It all is going to be the same all the time. The level in the swamp pond will be level with the water in the river. And you're going to find out a lot of other things that this removal has done. You know, all that stuff was there for a purpose. And now you're going to find out once it's gone. And the other thing is the trees. I hope that some of the trees we planted in 2007 that are on a slant can be dug and straightened because they're growing like this now. And those are maybe 4-inch trees already. The small ones are stripped because they bent over and the ice blocks shoved right across them. They're denuded of bark on at least one side, 8 feet up or something. But those are those twigs that the Army Corps gave us in return for trees. And the other thing is, you know, I hope everybody's aware we're cutting 22 more ash trees down there. So the total tree loss, if you count all the stuff that the Army Corps did and this year, you know, it's going to be in the 100 tree range. 100 trees. And we have no replanting. Right? No replanting. So it takes a long time. So we should do something about this, right? Proactively, not just let it. It's going to get much worse. And this underflow here, right at the base of the hill, that's another thing. You know? That water comes down there at a far greater velocity than it did before. You know, if you look at the gauge and the cubic feet per minute, you know, we had it at almost 13,000 cubic feet per minute under the big flood, and you know, where we never had 9,000. I mean, this has got tremendous power, you know, and there's nothing to stop it from Devon Avenue to here. So, you know, if we'd had a dam, you know, aerating the water, then it wouldn't have frozen, then we wouldn't have all this ice, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spaddy. Next up, ordinances and resolutions. We have a motion to approve an ordinance authorizing renewal of the aggregation program for electrical.
Sure. This item is our current contract under the municipal electric aggregation program will be coming due this coming July. This was based on a referendum that was approved by Riverside residents in 2012. And the village entering into a contract with the Northern Illinois Municipal Electric Collaborative, who helped the village conduct a request for qualifications and eventually a 2-year contract with Direct Energy. At the time that the program was initiated, the village had over 3,100 residences and small businesses enrolled in the program. the village has realized an average household savings of about $261 and a total savings for the village of about $813,000. Staff recommends that the village enter or work with NEMEC once again to solicit bids from multiple suppliers and select one that best meets the village's needs. Here with us is Sharon Durling from NIMEC, and she is available to answer any questions that trustees may have in regards to the program. We currently are scheduled to receive bids on March 24th, and hopefully we will get a good rate. But Sharon is here to answer any questions that you may have.
So
Sharon Durling.
before we
Oh,
get there,
sorry.
can we get a motion and a second? The motion is to approve an ordinance authorizing renewal of aggregation program for electrical load. Motion by Mr. Valerie, second by Mr. Foley. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Mr. President, again, Sharon Durling with the Northern Illinois Municipal Electric Collaborative. Really here to respond to questions, but I'll say, in short, prices are higher. You have a great rate of 4.88 cents. We've contracted, just to give you some color of where we are today, in the last month, rates between $6.46 and $7.05. Next question, what's the ComEd rate? We don't know. It'll be announced at the end of May. Cranes quoted the city of Chicago at 7.7. That seems high to us. Would say between 7 and 7.5 cents. Important to protect your residents is 2 suppliers are still offering that escape clause, not a price match that we had earlier, but should you engage in a contract that's higher than the ComEd rate, you'd be able to pull the ripcord and vacate the program. Rates are higher. We know at least 1 penny because of some capacity charges approved by regulators several years ago. So that's in the works. We know that. And then this cold shock of a winter has really, again, you have the chart that I've showed you. Prices have been volatile and higher. It's inverted. Right now, the 3-year pricing is the lowest prices we've seen. So happy to respond to any questions about where the market is today.
Trustees?
What we might expect.
So this agreement, is it a 12-month agreement, or how long would it be?
We'd get bids for you for 12, 24, 36, and we actually got bids for 39 months, so you would have those options.
There's also the type of energy, so you have a choice of 100% clean and 60.
Exactly.
Are we going to have those options also, or are you going to just do?
You'll have those options, and that's for you to decide. Can give a little color about that. Now with the margin narrowing, if you were to choose 100% green, as you currently have in your program, I think you would not receive that escape clause because, should the, your rate would be a little bit higher with the green. And if that ComEd came down, there's a little bit narrower margin, so you might not receive that. Some alternatives are, if you suspended the program, went back to ComEd, you're back to 0 in addition to what's required by law. If you chose 0% for the village or 25 or 50, you'd still have the option. We always offer sort of a little additional benefit. Any resident can choose to pay a little bit higher to get that 5%. It's an option. Let me just back up and say, if you chose 25 or 50% instead of 100, any resident would be able to choose for themselves. Opt into that. It's an option they don't have through ComEd, is the point I'm trying to make.
And if the ComEd rates do come in lower than you say, is it an automatic opt-out, or do our residents have to go about and do that themselves?
2 ways of doing it. There right now today are 2 suppliers that will offer the village in the program. Always residents can leave. There's always a 0 early termination fee, so it's always options. Residents always have the options, but you're acting on behalf of the village. 2 suppliers are still offering where you, the village, would say, we're done, the ComEd rate's lower, we're moving the folks back.
And which 2 companies are those?
Today, First Energy Solutions and sometimes Homefield Energy.
So not direct, the one we're with.
Correct. Direct is no longer bidding on aggregation programs. They've just ended that recently.
So how many suppliers were in the bid last year versus this year?
There are fewer suppliers. It's a competitive market, and some are falling by the wayside. Right now, we are tending to get 4 active responses, although we send it to about 7 or 8 suppliers, and some just decline to bid. Sometimes they do bid, sometimes they don't, depending on the profile of the village, if it fits with their strategy.
I have another question. I noticed in the document that we have in our board package that the number of participants in Riverside actually went down.
Mm-hmm.
Could you help me understand what's going on with that?
That is normal attrition, and we see that pattern in all 100 and some villages that we work with. It's because folks move out, so when they move
But
out, they're no longer in the
people move
program.
in.
And people move in, exactly. When people move in, they open a ComEd account, but they're not automatically enrolled, because that was just a set period. So sometimes in Village Hall, folks will tell them about it, but folks don't all know about the program or don't pick up the phone. They have to pick up the phone and actively join it.
And you don't contact new residents about that?
No, we don't know or don't have a way to know.
Is that something we should be doing more?
Well, I guess what we could do is we can include information in our new homeowners packet.
Because I noticed it went back up too. It went down and then it went back up.
We did a renewal. Thank you for that. We asked direct, would you do another mailing at your cost? And we'll get the, so we did, and it actually bounced
okay.
back up because they were willing to do that for you. ComEd gave us the fresh list of all the newbies in town, so to speak, so we could capture those.
And we knew this 2 years ago, that the wheelhouse was really the last 2 years, that those very expensive contracts that ComEd stuck with was whittling down and would continue to whittle down. So we knew that, you know, that really the meat of this was a couple of years ago.
And you were quick to strike when the iron was, oh, sorry.
And I saw people are still voting on aggregation just the last election. It was
2
like,
days ago.
yeah, they missed the boat. But you know, the other thing that I learned is Illinois was the 13th highest electrical utility rates until aggregation. Now we're like the 10th lowest. So this aggregation has done well for us, and hopefully we'll be able to capture a few more years out of this.
You've done very well. I know you were early on, some other trustees, to jump on it. So the timeliness is great, and you know your community has a lot to thank you for it, because like this trustee Vallerine just said, some folks voted Tuesday to do this, and you really struck when the iron is hot, and pretty soon you're going to hit that 1 million mark of cumulative savings for the residents because of your bringing this to vote.
Do you think it's had an effect on ComEd? Or is
No.
that not something you can say in public?
No, oh yes, absolutely can. ComEd actually supports it publicly on their website. Their CEO says we support aggregation because they no longer supply, and they've been cut out of that since 2007. And they've really facilitated it, and they've worked really well with us in getting this data for the second supplemental mailing for the community.
They still get their delivery costs.
They
still
oh,
get their
yeah.
delivery costs,
Yeah,
and that's where they make their money.
They do, yeah. I think they've been going up a little bit. I pay less attention because that's not under my purveyance, but I think they're okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, please.
Peter, it says we're going to solicit bids, and it was mentioned that we may have a choice to make,
Yes.
depending on the rate
Well, I
versus
think
the
I would-
percent of clean energy
Because
or renewable.
the ordinance that you're approving would give me the authority to work with our village attorney to enter into the agreement. So I think I'd like direction from the board as far as which of those options you want me to work with NIMEC and move forward with. I was under the impression that we were just going to continue with the 100% green.
I would think we'd be best served by keeping our options open, and especially if we have an energy company that allows residents to make that choice on their own. Not all residents might not make that choice. We should make that choice for them.
Especially depending on what the opt-out is.
At that time, when we did it 2 years ago, there wasn't much of a difference. I mean, there was, pennies.
Tenth of a penny. It's
Yeah.
still small, but now that the margin has collapsed so significantly, that might make the difference in your getting that escape clause where you can pull the ripcord and say, oh, ComEd's dropped down, we're moving them back.
I would like to see the differences when it comes to that also, and especially if residents are able to make that choice on their own. I would
Well,
think-
I don't know, because we're going to bid on Monday, and we have a 24-hour window to enter into the contract. I guess what I can do is, as soon as I get it, I can email.
I can tell you today what those differences are going to be, or what I've seen today and all this last week. A supplier, First Energy Solutions, they're kind of giving it away. It's just 0.3 of a penny, so 0.003. Most of the suppliers charge 1/10 of a penny, sometimes 0.8 of a penny. So that's the range.
That's the
Between
difference
the green
between
and the-
renewable.
Between
and
0 and 100%. It's small. But
That's the
Oh,
case
between-
I'd want.
that's small,
I'd say
but
100%, yeah.
what might be bigger is were you to lose that option of the
Yeah.
escape clause. That might be of more monetary value. That'd be up to you to consider.
Especially if the longer-term price is lower than the short-term.
Precisely. We know that these capacity charges I meant go up a penny starting June 1st. We know in 2 years, because this is all set years in advance, they're going to come down into year 3. So you've got a bigger danger of that occurring in year 3. And that could happen. I can't see into the future, but I could see that happening. So it's a protection that you,
And we won't know that till Monday.
yep, Monday.
I guess if we wanted to do it like we did last time, where 2 of the trustees, we can just meet in my office and with 2 of the trustees, and the board, if you're comfortable with 2 of the trustees and working with myself and Michael on the contract and then going forward.
Well, I think it'd be nice if we had a consensus from the board here with regard to the green aspect. I mean, one option would be to go all green but have a shorter contract. That would give us an out, so to speak, right?
And there might be a reason for doing that in an inverted market anyway.
The shorter contracts, the prices are going to be above where we expect ComEd to come out in June. Just, sorry, it's, that's the facts. And here's our dramatic picture that kind of shows where it is. So, but we can tell you right now pretty much what those difference in prices are. So the board could maybe advise, I'm not speaking about the board would advise it. We know it would be between 0.3 and maybe, 0.03. It's getting so incremental. Can't even say it anymore. 0.3 of a penny.
But that's not really the issue. What you just said, it's not, I mean, the pricing is pretty self-evident. The
Thank
problem
you,
is
yes.
not having the escape clause.
Yes.
So what is your thought about that aspect of it? I mean, if we go into the all green, we could face a situation in a couple of years where we're paying above the ComEd rate, right?
Well, it's a contract, it depends on how long we go into the contract, right? So,
And when we say there's no escape clause, so a resident could not opt out either. It would be, we're all in.
Thanks for bringing that up, Trustee Collins. Residents may be real clear, may always leave at any time
Okay.
for 0 penalty.
Okay, so if we went all
Yes.
green and ComEd's rates dropped, then residents could individually opt out.
Right.
So we could opt
Absolutely.
out individually.
And we could notify residents.
We could
of
notify
that
people,
option.
you're going to want to get out of here.
Yes, you could, absolutely.
Maybe
So
that's
the protection.
I would be fine with that.
Yeah, as long as there's some, I just don't want to lock residents into a higher rate than what they'd be paying.
I would be fine with that, because I think as a community, we've been committed to trying to be more green, and
I feel very
we should stick,
strongly
I
about
know
the
you
green.
do,
I do
yeah.
too.
I do too, and I think we should stick with that and then just monitor the market and
Yeah, I'm
Is
good
that-
with that.
Okay, good.
Yep.
is that good?
So I will work with Sharon, Dave Hoover from NIMAC, and Michael, and hopefully we'll get good returns on the bid. And we can, right, if I'm not mistaken, on Monday, if the price comes in higher than we are anticipating, we can always say no and go
You
out to
may-
bid again.
You may refuse all bids. You're free
Because
to.
we have until the middle of the summer or whenever. it is.
Well, no, not till the middle of summer, but
But then our
maybe
contract-
2-3 weeks. Yes, but there's some regulatory events that have to occur, opt-out notices. It's about 60 to 70 day implementation
So when it says term
process.
through July 2014, what does that mean?
That is exactly when the term is up. But prior to that, there are some processes that have to occur per regulation. Every resident has to get an opt-out letter by law because you'd be engaging in a new contract, new rate, new terms. They get a period of 14 to 21 days. I think the law is going to change it. It's going to be 21 days to opt out or not. So there's that period of deadline. Then there's some data processing. It goes to ComEd. There's another 10 days, probably more information than you want, but the whole process is 60 to 70 days before everyone is enrolled. So that's why we're here now in March for
And
July.
as part of our agreement with NIMEC, they would assist us with all of that.
Right, I understand, yeah.
Can you just clarify what do you put under green? What is considered green?
Good question. Renewable energy credits. They can be hydro, methane, gas, solar, wind. Typically, it's a large hydro, and it's not necessarily generated in Illinois. It can be, but it's probably generated on our grid, and that covers 12 states from New Jersey into just northern Illinois. And those are actual certificates that are audited and monitored, so it's a real representation of actual renewable energy that's been produced somewhere. on the
So
grid.
what it means is we don't necessarily use that renewable energy ourselves.
Right.
It doesn't come from a wind farm necessarily, or a wave farm, or whatever.
But you're definitely supporting
But
the
we
industry.
support it. And how is it decided who gets the credits? Are they bid on? I mean, so we have X number of dollars worth of credits coming out of Riverside.
It's 100% of usage. So if you use, 1,000 kilowatt hours, you purchase credits to represent 1,000 kilowatt hours.
okay.
And there's an open, it's like a commodity
Yeah,
market that you
right.
can purchase those.
Okay.
How would we be, as a resident, how would we be alerted that Commonwealth Edison's prices are more or less than what our contracted prices would be? So we sign up at 6.5 and Com comes out at 5.8. Is NIMEC going to take the lead to make sure our residents know that, or is it something that's going to fall on our shoulders?
Yes, we will. That's our job. And it's complicated because if you call ComEd today, they will say, they will tell you, the ComEd supply rate is 4.6. That's true. There are some, as you know, from our last round, there's some other portions that your rate covers. So it's 4.6, and right when folks call and tell me that, I'm not going to call them a liar, say that's true, and you have to add these two other charges, so the effective rate is 6.023. How are you going to find that? You go to the Illinois, pluginillinois.org website, but you've got to read through a few paragraphs. I'm happy to get on the phone and talk you through that, but it's just not simple, and you don't see that number clearly much anywhere. It'll be in the press, I'm sure, the Tribune, Cranes. That would be our responsibility to watch that and let you know. I gave you the long answer, I'm sorry.
That's good, that's
But-
perfect.
Sorry.
I thought what you were asking though is if that happens, will they assist us in contacting our residents to let them know that it happened?
You will, that's what Jay
We'll
said.
absolutely let you know. How we let residents know, I'm not sure.
So I think she's saying that she's going to let us know.
I think it would fall to the
It would be
village.
up
So
to us.
you wouldn't send a mailing out to our residents to
I'm
alert
not sure
them?
that we could for your contract, but we could certainly put it in newsletters, an email blast, and even in the press. And be real clear about that.
Do we have listings of who signs up? Or is that what we get from ComEd? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
So, trustees, I asked Mr. Ballerine if he would sit in with Peter, because Joe worked on the first time around and was instrumental in us getting this to begin with, so he's got the background, I think, for it, so I appreciate that. Okay, so anything else? Can we please call the roll on the motion to approve an ordinance authorizing renewal of aggregation program for electrical work?
Trustee Sessom.
Aye.
Trustee Howell.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Earl.
I'm sorry, can I just ask one more question? It has nothing to do with the vote. So we buy and sell that, there's a market for buying and selling credits. Yes.
But the commodity market, or the futures market for some of this has collapsed. Some of the companies have actually gone out of business. Am I not understanding, I mean, the actual exchange itself has gone out of business, or is very thinly traded right now.
For RECs, you mean?
For renewable certificates, or for, and do you know, does that affect how we spend our money? I guess I want to make sure that if we're buying credits, that there's actually a market for them when these private companies, the exchanges, have been having such a hard time.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the exchange and how that's traded, but with some of our suppliers, they'll own their own generating capacity, and so they'll
For the
credit
renewable.
toward- Yes. Sorry, but I mean, they're definitely available. That's part of why the price is so low. We think extraordinarily.
So
It's dropped a little bit, which means, you know, the demand isn't that high. It's available. It can be had, and we can get reports on the amount of RECs.
Okay, I'm just curious, because I know one of the exchanges went out of business, so I was
Yeah,
just
I don't know that
curious.
they buy them on, I said that they're available on
Yeah.
exchange, but they can also buy them, I think,
Just-
outside of a formal exchange.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Next up is considerations. Tonight we have a bit of an unusual conversation, and I would ask the folks who are watching at home to pay attention to this, because this is an opportunity to kind of have a second bite at a potential apple. Back in 2000, and Mr. Sclera is going to give you more detail, but in general, back in 2006, the village board passed an ordinance with regard to reducing the speed limits around park zones. So the ordinance has been on the books since 2006, but has not been implemented. We don't have the signs out there to implement the project. So this is an opportunity for us to reconsider whether this is something that we want to do. And if it is, we can move forward. If it isn't, then we should repeal the ordinance, because there's no point in having useless laws on the books. So that's the overview. So, Peter, do you want to kind of just give some more of the details of this?
In order for staff to take the ordinance that was enacted back in 2006 to the next step, the village would need to install approximately 80 signs in the areas designated in the write-up that are considered park zone areas. And Ed has been able to receive estimates for the cost of the signs, which would be installed in-house, so there would be some savings in regard to that. But the sign cost to manufacture, the amount of signs needed, would be about $6,000. The type of sign that we are speaking of is very different than what is currently being used. They are bright signs because the intent is to notify motorists of the upcoming change in speed, and also to help hopefully alert them to the fact that there are children present. One of the things that we have sat down and we've talked about is, I think, we would go through the area to identify whether or not we can reduce that number a little bit and utilize either existing poles or some existing signs that would also allow us to stay within the parameters of the ordinance and rules as far as the statute provides. So I have Chief Weitzel and Director Bailey are both here to answer any questions the board may have in regard to this program.
And let me, it's, yeah, for the folks at home, let me just read, and this is, the idea here is to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour by the park zones. So let me just quickly read it, and then the folks at home can know whether it's something that impacts them. At the time, back in 2006, the board identified Harrington Park, Blythe Park, Turtle Park, and Big Ball Park as potential park zone areas. And the following streets would be the park zone streets. Blythe Road from the intersection of Shenstone to East Grove, Kent Road from Leasley to East Grove, Delaplane from Robinson Court South to the intersection of Olmsted, Robinson Court from the intersection of Harlem to Delaplane, Olmsted from Delaplane to Harris, Delaplane from Long Common west to the intersection of Nuttall, Long Common Road from the intersection of Delaplane to the intersection of Addison, Nuttall from Delaplane to Bartram, and Bartram from the intersection of Nuttall Road east to the intersection of Long Common Road and Addison. And maybe we could put this on the website, the village website, so people could actually go and look at this list. That's okay.
You know what we can do is we can move it off of the agenda and we'll move it on to like the front page or anything. Okay.
Yeah. So that way, if folks are at home, if you want to look at this list that I just read, I know I went through it fast, you can take a look to see whether or not you would be impacted by this. So with that, Chief Weitzel, do you want to give us a little more background on this?
Absolutely, Mr. President. This actually came about because of concerns that residents have been bringing forward about traffic enforcement and speed enforcement. And then when I did my research, I actually was reminded by one of the trustees that in 2006, the ordinance was passed. At that time, when I did my research, I actually had to get my research off of floppy disks. That's how long ago it was. When I found him, it was started actually by the Parks and Rec director. Lori Cozy approached the chief of police at that time, asked him to partner with her to come to the board to get that passed because it came, according to the memo I saw from Lori, it came from the Parks and Rec board at that time, just showed an interest when they saw that there was this statute that could be created. The board did pass it, as the president said. However, follow-up communications that were in that file were that it was really unclear as to how many signs were going up by the trustees that voted, and the signs were never erected to go up. And there was a follow-up email in the file from the police chief to the manager at that time telling her that we could not enforce it unless there was the signage up. And the response email was that at that time the board did not want to put up that many signs that were described the way the village manager just described them, because that's what the statute calls for in the packet. You really can't deviate from that type of sign for the park zone. So I thought I'd bring it forward to the manager, and if he felt it should come in front of the board for review on whether we should start to enforce that, then we would need to put the signage up. If not, then we should probably eliminate the ordinance in those areas.
Chief, especially for people at home, could you review exactly what signs are required to be put up?
There is the park zone sign itself, which is a longer sign. It has a green top to it that will state that it's a park zone, the standard speed limit in the middle, then when children are present at the bottom half, and you can add wordage. There's an option if you look at the package. You can designate times. So if you only, nobody is supposed to use the park after 9 o'clock, the law would apply. So you could add 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. if you wanted to. And then there are the signs when you approach the speed zone, which would be park zone or park zone ahead, and then a sign with the anticipated speed. It doesn't state that those have to be freestanding posts, but some of them would. So I think Director Bailey, if he could find places to put some of the pre-signs on, he could, but I would imagine that the sign with the speed limit itself with the green top would have to be would be a new sign with a new post. Maybe the director can answer that question, but that's what I would foresee, because the problem is that if you get an attorney that is representing a client that we arrest, I strike that, have a ticket to, and they win that, the judge will order us not to issue the tickets there because we're not in compliance with what the state statute is. So we would not be issuing any other citations there in the future. So, and that does happen. Because typically if somebody is to get a ticket, like we talked about it a couple of board meetings ago, a judge will fine individuals a higher rate that I've found in school zones and these park zones, so they could a minimum ticket in Cook County is $75, but the typical ticket fine is close to $200 when you figure in the court costs and et cetera. So judges sometimes will assess larger fines in those areas, and I think the park zone would be one that you would have a large fine assessed. So residents and motorists will hire attorneys to represent them on just simple traffic matters like that, especially if it goes to strike against their driver's license.
And the reasons they're so, because we're talking about upwards of 80 signs, right?
Total, it wouldn't be just the speed signs, but if you take into effect the other pre-signs up to it, there would be a significant amount of signs put in.
Because you'd have to have the so-called pre-signs on streets leading up to the park zone. It might not even be one of the streets that we've listed here as being on the
Correct,
park zone.
because the state lists the amount of space that has to be between the signs for the ordinance to be enforced.
So what I had in mind for tonight was for the trustees to have a chance to talk about this, let this sit until our next meeting to see if residents would like to opine about it as well, and then we can decide at our next meeting how we want to move forward. So what do you think, Ms. Sussman?
That's fine, but I still have
please.
a couple of questions. The sign that says when children are present, is that required? Could you put up a sign that says speed limit 20, park zone speed limit 20? Or do you have to say between the hours of 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. or when children are present?
You don't have to put the time. You do have to put when children are present, because the ordinance is for use of the park, so they don't really want the police enforcing 20 mile an hour at 3 o'clock in the morning. So even though that's how they cover, when children are present, the police officers are supposed to know that there shouldn't be children and organized activities at 2 o'clock in the morning in the park, so we shouldn't be enforcing the 20 mile an hour speed limit at that time. But it does allow you to put a time on frame if you want. That part of it is an option.
Trustee Sussman, can I just interrupt and follow up on that particular question? So if a park is being used by 100 adults, then the 20 miles per hour doesn't
No,
apply?
the ordinance says if the park is for recreational activities, organized activities, it does not state an age limit. So if an adult are having a soccer game in that park, the speed limit would apply.
So but if it says when children are present, I'm going to read that to mean that I can go faster.
I agree with you, but it says that the actual packet says that if the park is being used for organized activities,
That makes sense.
it is considered a park speed zone.
So that would be 1 hour, reason for putting hours on there instead of when children are present. If you want to
Or
avoid.
nothing at all are present.
Pardon?
The way I understand it is when children are present, has to be on it. It's the hours that can be
That's
taken
correct.
on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you had a
It
choice.
has to be on.
Oh, okay.
These signs are very similar to the ones you have by the school zones, right? Right
Yes.
over here by Hauser, Central, and St. Mary's. They're almost identical. You have the school above it.
Yes.
And
Just a different color. That's
Yeah,
correct.
can we expand? I think one of the biggest problems we have, or if I was going to look at all these areas, the problem area I see is Long Common. Can we expand that school zone to encompass more of Long Common and get it all the way down to Big Ballpark?
I believe the current state laws, we can expand the school zone 1,000 feet within the 1,000 feet from the school's property line.
We currently don't do that, though, right?
Some do.
Some do?
Yeah. Some of the schools are 500 feet, some of them are more than that. Presbyterian Church has a preschool. They came to the board years ago and asked to be included. That is her ordinance. They fall into the school zone. The high school has them on Ridgewood. They don't have them on First Avenue. The high school is not 1,000 feet. It's just Ridgewood and Golf.
But they're going to put them on First Avenue.
That's my understanding.
Not 20 miles an hour.
No, not 20 miles an hour.
No, they
But school zone, yeah,
With
right.
the school zone signs, when it says when children are present, does that mean when you see children, or does that mean during school hours?
That's supposed to mean when you see children. It's not the school hours isn't written into the state law.
Okay, so it's if the children are inside.
Are present, yeah. Now, I've seen some judges say
I've had
that
that
adults are
disagreement
supposed to know that
I
school
wondered
is
about
from
that.
8 to 4, so you might consider that present, but that's actually not in the statute. It's when you see observed children.
And this is a state statute for clarification. This is not our statute.
Correct. The village just adopted, in the ordinance, they adopted the recommended language from the state back in 2006.
I would like to see how far we can extend our school zones, especially along Long Common. Get it to as far out as 1,000 as we can.
Because St. Mary's is right there on the corner,
right
too.
on the corner. So you can, get a very good tape measure and go all the way up Long Common.
We have a wheel that we could measure.
You could actually use Mary Park as the furthest northern point because they do own Mary Park. And
Right, so that takes you right to where the old
that buys,
convent is.
that buys you another 300 feet down Long Common.
That could get us all the way down Long Common. And then, with the Presbyterian Church, that obviously takes care of Berry Point. And if we wanted to include Fairbanks, I know Fairbanks was talking about this, that would be 1,000 from there. I think a lot of our other parks are developed in the way that they're off the street. Harrington Park, Indian Gardens, they're set back and
Well, Blythe is already part of the school, so.
Blythe is part of the school zone. So I think we can incorporate what we're trying to do by lengthening our school zones. I personally think that what we need to do first, before we put up any more signs, is get rid of some of the signs that we put up for reasons that, we put up a new stop sign. So we want to tell everybody that there's a stop sign there. So we have, stop sign ahead, and now it's been 15 years, and I can see the stop sign, and now I also see a stop sign ahead sign. So, we need to do something to get rid of all of the signs. Signs are litter.
I think as far as the stop signs go, maybe Director Bailey, I think we have to, by statute, have to keep the signs for the stop signs
The warning
there.
for a stop
Yeah,
sign.
even though the stop sign's been there 25 years, it's more of a state requirement for liability reasons, I believe.
Why would
Maybe
why,
Ed could direct.
why wouldn't we have one then in front of every one of our stop signs?
They probably weren't all put up at the time here when the sign went in, back whenever that happened.
I share no great enthusiasm for signage. I think we have plenty of signs, and so I'm not anxious to put up any more than necessary. I don't know, in any specific case why there might be a stop ahead sign, but from a signage standpoint, from my public works standpoint, we're governed by the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Big manual, really comes from the Federal Highway Administration, is adopted by the State Departments of Transportation. Local units of government are required to adopt it also. And that dictates signage, where it's placed, and sometimes advanced warning signs. That's probably what that really is, that stop ahead sign. There might be occasions where there's discretion. Sometimes there's discretion, local discretion about placing signs like that. Other times it's required. So I don't know, it depends where the sign is, what the conditions are, and there may not be any reason other than when it was first installed years ago, someone thought it was a good idea.
So in that case, we have an option.
Yeah, it depends on specific sign, circumstances, but never a bad idea to think about why those signs are up. A lot of it has to do with enforcement, if you don't have the signs that you can't enforce laws and that kind of stuff.
Mr. Fulton?
I certainly can't support this in the way that it is drawn up now because, Joe, I think places like Veteran Park, I think places like Indian Garden, you go by Indian Gardens in the fall when there's a soccer match going on down there and there's cars parked all the way up Fairbank Road, well into the 200 block of Fairbank. And people running in and out of cars and moms dropping their kids off for their soccer tournaments or whatever. That is something that I think is important. I agree that we have way too many signs in this town that a lot of people don't pay attention to anyways. And so to add more signs is just to blight the landscape even more. I would be more up for and interested in looking park by park working with Chief into the areas that are high-speed areas, Long Common, Scottswood. I've seen many cars, I know growing up on Fairbank in the 200 block, seeing cars go past my parents' house at a very high rate of speed.
Yeah, well, you were in those cars, Mike.
Not all the time, Gene, not all the time. Not until I got my license. But I think if we take a closer look at the areas, we did this, you had that device out from on Fairbank by the Berry Point Bridge down to the Presbyterian. I think, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but over a 10-day period, we saw cars traveling in the rate of 60 miles an hour in a very short distance. I mean, we're talking one block. They were able to get their car up to 60-plus miles an hour by the time they reached the stop sign at the Presbyterian Church. Well, if that's an occurrence, and we had 1,400 vehicles in a 10-day period, and most of them were speeding, well, then that says to me that's a high-speed area near a park. I would be more open to controlling the speed in the high-traffic areas like Long Common, around the ballpark, on Delaplane, along the ballpark. I noticed it this winter when I'd be out there working on the ice rink, the cars traveling at a high rate of speed down Delaplane. Veterans Park and Parkway, real hard since it's on a curve, and as Joe said, pushed back. It does also border a street, and though we have a berm and a fence, it's protecting the kids from 26th Street. But I'd be more interested, I don't like how this is now, because I think we've neglected some of the areas that I think are way more dangerous than some of the ones that are already on the current ordinance.
And Chief, correct me if I'm wrong about this. One of the problems, though, is that because we're a non-home rule community, let's say that we wanted to put a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit sign on Fairbank.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it unless you can tie in to something like this.
So
we can't, the only place within our, am I correct with this? The only place you can have 20 mile an hour would be either in a school zone or a park zone. So if it's a street that's not related to one of those things, we can't go in and put a 20 mile.
But we can put it if it's in a park zone?
If it's a park zone.
What do you
Can we
call,
be
what do you call
selective?
that stretch of land that goes from the swim club to the Berry Point Bridge? Do you call that not a park? Is that, I mean, it
Well, that's
looks like
within
a park to
1,000
me.
miles of the Presbyterian Church. I mean,
1,000 miles?
you can 1,000 feet. I mean, you can use the church there as your catalyst, and you can stretch all the way to the swim club, probably all the way to the bridge.
You know, I think it comes down to looking to where the people congregate and where the traffic seems to be flowing at the fastest rate of speed. Those would be the areas that I would focus on, and unfortunately, if those areas need signage, then those areas need signage, and if we can incorporate the existing signposts to accommodate those signs, I'd be interested in talking about that. I don't live in the Harrington Park area. I can't speak to the traffic rates of speed on Delaplane, but if people say that they're going fast down Delaplane, if you're writing a lot of tickets, your ticket issuance should also be part of the research. Where are you writing high-speed tickets near a park? We should be looking at that kind of information. Are you writing a lot of tickets in the Indian Gardens area? If you're not, well, then we take that off the table for discussion.
To Jean's point, can we be selective?
Yeah,
as
can
to
we be
where-
selective?
Can we do it at some parks and not at others?
I believe that is legal, right?
I believe so, because the board adopted those, the ones in 2006. I think they asked the park and rec director what parks have a certain amount of activity, and that's how they based those.
Outside of this program, though, just with the regular program, can we be selective and choose just some parks and not do the safe park program, but just set the speed limit at 20 miles?
I mean, we have the speed limits, Gene pointed to me today.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I believe.
It's 20 miles an hour, I'm sorry, from like where the sled hill is
Right.
to the library?
It's 20 miles an hour from the train station virtually to the bridge, actually, because it's 20 miles an hour in front of Scottswood Common on Berry Point, and there's a 20-mile-an-hour sign on Berry Point between Scottswoods and
And
Scottswood
we've
and the
had
bridge
those
already.
signs there for a while.
School hours.
It doesn't say only, well, this wouldn't change that, right? It's only, we'd have to say when kids are present. I guess you could argue people live on those streets, so there are kids present. But then
So,
But it's, there are 20-mile speed limits there already, and that's one of the speed zones. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I think we should be aware that there are 20-mile-an-hour speed limits on one of the streets that we're talking about.
Well, I could have one of my officers measure off 1,000 from all the schools. That may take a little bit, but we just took delivery of the device that the township purchased for us Monday, which is the newer version of the box. And if the board so desires, or the manager wants me to move that around town to these more areas that Trustee Foley said had potential high volume, we could get a 7-day run on each of those sheets with some data behind it, and then maybe come back to the board with that information, not only the 1,000 feet, but the data that's collected from the individual roadways.
I just would like, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Clarification, did you actually find that very many people were going 60 miles an hour on Fairbanks when you did the data collection there?
Not as a whole number of the cars that were there, no. I think there was less than 1.9% of the vehicles were over the posted speed limit.
Less than 1.9%?
Yeah, there was...
Less than 2% were over the posted speed limit?
Correct. Now, that was the 100 block.
But you did post speeds up to and in excess of 60 miles an hour.
well, there was some thought that that might have been an instrument failure with regard to the box.
Okay.
I have one more question. Could you explain to me why speed bumps in some of these areas are or are not a good idea as an alternative?
I'm sure Director Bailey would love to answer that too.
Well, the snow plows, I think.
You know, I'm not a believer in those, but they have come out with these new products that are called speed humps that are rubberized devices and are much lower to the ground. They still have to be bolted in. They're bright colored. They use them in school zones and high pedestrian areas. But I know that the larger speed cement bumps are extremely difficult on the public works trucks, the police vehicles, the fire department vehicles. And I do believe that a study that I saw by the National Transportation Department is that cars speed up between them. That the humps are actually better, the smooth humps, that the boots, they actually go faster between the set of them than they do, not having them on that street. So, and believe me, that when the cars, if you were to put those on, say, for example, the 100 block of Fairbanks, I think the residents would be calling us because they make a lot of noise when the cars go over those, over 25, 20, I mean, they hit those things, and it is very loud. So,
Everybody wants those down the street from them.
but I do believe in that they have the smoothing humps are the new, they're rubberized, and I think those are more effective. But they're usually used in school zones and high traffic areas, pedestrian traffic areas.
Just curious about that.
Yes, I think one thing we need to keep in mind here in this discussion is that, well, let me preface this by saying when I first looked at this, I thought, well, sure, why not? Why wouldn't you have lower speed limits at parks? And then I started asking questions, and I found out, maybe I should have known this, but that all of our streets are 25 miles per hour now. Is that correct?
In the village, yes.
Except for the designated school zones, right?
Except for the school zones. So we're talking 5 miles per hour here difference. It's not much. I mean, what I would prefer to see is just simply stricter enforcement in park and school zones, and keep the school zones at 20 and expand those as needed or as we see fit. But that won't solve any problems on weekends because they don't apply on weekends, right? The school zone at 20.
No, they don't.
Right.
Unless there's an organized activity going on.
Right. So I guess my feeling at this point, I want to hear more and hear from residents and everything, but I think 25 is a safe speed in front of parks, and I would like to see. I'd be in favor of, and I'd leave it up to the police department's discretion, but I'd be in favor of stricter enforcement or less tolerance in those areas. But I'm comfortable with 25 as a speed limit, generally speaking.
And what about Joe's suggestion that we extend the 1,000 feet
school limit as far as possible as
That's
well
fine,
at 20
too.
miles an hour.
That's fine too, but again, that wouldn't apply to the weekends when the parks are used the most. It certainly wouldn't do any harm though to expand the school zones.
Well, I'm curious, if you put a sign up that says school, 20 miles an hour when, school zone when kids are present, when children are present, would that apply in an area where children are in the park on a Saturday morning?
Yes.
If it's within the school zone, so it's the same, it has the same effect.
It would have some
for that
effect on the
1,000
weekends,
feet.
sure.
If it's within the school.
Right, that 1,000 feet that we talked about, yeah, and we have appropriate signage so that motorists are warned about it. Well, I would like to see where that, to Joe's point, the 1,000 feet stretch
Yeah.
I think that's really
as a
good.
starting point.
I just asked Manager Scalera if it would be possible with our GIS capability to actually show this. Maybe we can have a graph next time where you can all see exactly what we're talking about. Because I'd be curious if some of the kind of feeder streets around our school districts, I wonder if there are places that maybe we missed over the years where we could back up with this new 1,000-foot.
For the school zone?
Yeah.
There might be, maybe the sign is only within a certain, maybe it's within 700 feet, and we could extend it another 300, so.
You could go down
We
to
would
Addison.
kind of have somebody measure where the current signs are, see how far that is out, and then if it goes out, we could come back with a proposal. If you want, here's where a sign could go for school zone, it could go farther out, or
Which
that type of-
which doesn't alleviate the sign problem necessarily, but
Well, not 60, hopefully.
Yeah, so why don't we do this? Well, I know that I don't want to drop something like that on your staff just whimsically. I mean, do you think you could have that information for us in a couple of weeks, or would it be better to wait a month and put this off? Maybe
It'd be better to wait, because I think that we'd have to get out and measure. And if you want me to also do the speed box, if you'd like me to select these heavy streets, we probably need 7 days of data on each street we put it on for, just like the last report for speed, volume, how many cars are traveling. So you get a sense of Long Common by Mary Park. We could install it there if you want some other streets.
This ordinance has been on the books since 2006.
We waited 8
done in
years.
the next 2
Waited 8
weeks.
years. I think we can wait another month.
are you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, we can do that. I think a couple of weeks would be pushing it a little bit, but, I could hopefully get it done within the next month or two, right? Because I think I'd have to wait a bit longer for the traffic data.
Why don't you and Manager Scalera just work together on this, and when you're ready to bring this back to us, and of course the residents can give us their input, any of us at any time about this, and then we'll figure this out in the next couple of months or so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Any new business? Nope. Hearing none, I would ask for a motion, a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ballerini, second by Ms. Collins. Please call the roll.
Trustee Sussman.
Aye.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins. Trustee Foley.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.